Hey, it's Marcel. I am excited about this new offer to my podcast listeners. You can now receive all my best coaching tips, advice, and strategies, daily micro challenges, exclusive stuff straight from my coaching toolbox. All of that can now come to your phone via text for the price of a cheap cup of coffee, $4.95 per month. That's it. And you get a 14-day trial to, take it for a spin. And if you don't like it, no biggie. You just type stop and you won't hear from me again. It's that simple. And by the way, you're going to be texting me, not a robot. It's not AI driven. It's me on the other end sending you weekly messages to help you become a better and more effective leader. I would love to engage you by text. So if you want to subscribe, grab a pen and a piece of paper right now. I'm going to give you a number. Text me the word love, LOVE, to 424-377-7916. Again, text me the word love to 424-377-7916.
Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast, the show that explores all the ways you can evolve into the best version of yourself as a leader. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love and care and inclusion, it will make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about love as a leadership and business strategy. Let's do this.
Okay, so if you've been listening to us for a while, you know what we're about, right? Sometimes I'll bring the topic of the heart into the conversation. Listen, if you're not ready to talk about the heart from a scientific standpoint, none of that squishy kumbaya stuff. This may not be your episode, but hold on before you sign off. If you like science and physiology and the connection between the brain and the heart for optimal performance, I knew that I would get your attention. We're seeing a shift. So what used to be the idea that bringing the heart and our emotions into workplace leadership was seen as soft and weak, and maybe even undermining productivity and profitability, correct? Is that where you're going? Maybe? Hard stuff? Too soft? Yeah, not suitable for business, hard business environments. Well, that perception, folks, is changing because leadership in the business landscape is changing. So the traditional notion that the best managers are the brainiest and maybe the most analytical or charismatic, intentionally insulated from their emotions, where they check their feelings at the door on Monday morning once they walk into the workplace. That whole notion and that perception is changing. And here's where it gets really interesting. If you've heard of the HeartMath Institute, their research has been focused on the physiology of optimal human performance. What has to go on inside a person's brain, body, and even nervous system to be able to think clearly, maintain composure and perform to one's full potential. Well, according to Dr. Rollin McCraty, he is HeartMath's director of research, they've discovered that the heart is much more than a pump. It actually has intelligence, and it's in constant two-way communication with the brain. Not only that, but the heart sends more information to the brain than vice versa. So how do you think that affects our decision-making process as leaders? How we lead others, how we treat other human beings, and how we feel about ourselves so that we're in that most optimal state? Well, the conversation we're going to have is with none other than Dr. Rollin McCraty, a psychophysiologist, and as I mentioned, the research director at the HeartMath Institute, where he's been in that role for 33 years. Dr. McCraty is the author of Science of the Heart, Exploring the Role of the Heart in Human Performance. This is going to be an enlightening conversation. we do get a bit heavy at times on scientific terminology, but we come around to explaining how what happens in and within your heart literally affects everything around you. So let's get right to it. Here's my conversation with Dr. Rollin McCraty. So Dr. Rollin McCraty now joins us. Welcome to the podcast.
Great. Thanks, Marcel. That's great to be here.
All right. So we start the show this way. You ready?
I'm ready.
What's your story?
Oh, what's my story? Well, that's a long story, but I'm going to try and make it really short. And I grew up in actually Missouri, a small farm, and my grandfather was the town mechanic, and I hung out there a lot. So I, at a very young age, developed a curiosity for how things work. And you probably knew more by the time I was 10 than a lot of people about tractors and cars and how to take them apart and fix them and so on. So I've always had that kind of a curiosity and an adventuresome spirit, I guess you could say. And I won't go through all that, but I ended up joining the military and to get out of small town Nebraska at that point. And because of my background, had a very high aptitude for electronics and mechanics. So in fact, I was in the first literally the very first wave of the all-volunteer Army. So I got to pick my job and, if, as long as you qualified for it and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up in kind of top-level guided missile system support. So I got half of my whole career, my 3 years in the Army was in school for high-level electronics. Then I basically used the GI Bill and went to the University of Nebraska to get a degree in electronics engineering, and ended up going to work for Motorola. But I always had this curiosity as a systems engineer, communication systems engineer. But I always had this deeper curiosity for because of that. I kind of came into the world with that curiosity, and I would be asking professors and when I could, well, what actually is a magnetic field? Or an electric field, or gravity, these kinds of questions. And I never liked the answer because all you get is the mathematical formula. Well, here's how it describes its behavior. No. What is it? Right? No, don't ask that. Go away. Basically, that was the real, that's kind of still true to this day. Anyway, I ended up found a book actually at the bookstore at the University of Nebraska that was really ultimately talking about consciousness, and had some actually answers, or at least hints at answers of the deeper questions that I was really searching for. So I ended up moving to California and got a degree in consciousness research, consciousness studies. This is back in the 70s.
Were your parents thrilled about that?
Well, I'd already kind of left the nest by this point. They weren't really thrilled with me moving to California, I guess. But anyway, so then through that, I'm going to leave a lot out here. I got involved in a group and helped bring spirulina to the world, which is a superfood kind of thing. So I had to learn about nutrition and this and that, and we're the first to do it.
Oh, my.
And I didn't know, I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about business at this point, right? I'm having to learn accounting and, because I was running a company, one of two companies that we started in that era. So I kind of trial by fire, you might say, learned through that era and marketing and all this. So there was that era. And I'll add one part to the story. So we ended up, I learned about the power of media pretty quickly. So we ended up helping engineer, if you will, an article in the National Enquirer, a rag magazine in the supermarket, right? I was shocked at the power of the National Enquirer. I'll tell you what, they did a front page story on spirulina, and I built the business up. My kind of angle of it, we were doing about $150K a month in sales. Not bad, for green algae to the world, right? I'd never heard of this. In the next 2-week period after that article came out, I wrote about $20 million in business in the following 2 weeks. Now, how we pulled that off to get that much, stuff shipped and all, that's a whole other story, but we did it. Get pretty creative. And anyway, we took the profits of that, and because there really was a humanitarian motive behind this, and that was to feed the world's hungry populations, right? To just kind of complete superfood that you could live on.
Oh yeah, it's mission. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we went to the deserts of Southern California and Desert Hot Springs, that area. You probably know the area. I know you're from the LA area.
Ah, right.
And actually went out and proved that you could build a spirulina farm in the middle of a desert and do this, right? And that went absolutely nowhere. I mean, we were way ahead of our time, Marcel, way ahead of our time. I mean, we're talking, 3-story high giant spray dryers that are solar powered and this kind of stuff, and farms. And so it went nowhere in terms of actually helping people. And that's, meanwhile, remember, I've got a degree in consciousness, right? So, I know that this is about consciousness. Well, that, in hindsight, I can truly say that experience is where my idealism bubble got popped. And it became a very visceral, real understanding that, no, it is about consciousness. Because we had the technology. It was really blocked. The reason it didn't go anywhere was it was all the bureaucracy, the political levels, people in governments not really wanting people fed.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's true. So I'm a little lot clearer on what went on now than I was in that time period, but I basically said to myself, screw this humanitarian stuff. I'm going to go make money again. So I started a company in electrostatics, and started in a garage, literally, one of those stories. And I think in our third year, we were doing around 15 million a year, very successful, and it grew on from there.
Yeah.
And just the way I'm wired, I guess, the way I came into the planet this time around, there was just a deeper yearning that saving the life of another microprocessor, or which is really what our company did in this kind of electrostatics environment, wasn't going to do it. I mean, I had a great time, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I mean, it was really fun, that kind of rapid growth and, offices around the world and this and that. But
sure,
another sports car in the driveway wasn't quite doing it, it was this deeper yearning. So now there's actually a part of that area that's really important for the story, though, because I ended up we were installing large systems in, like Ford and Chrysler Electronics and, a lot of the big companies. We were doing, whole factory systems, multi-million-dollar systems we were installing. So I was having to interact with plant managers, right down to the people that worked on the floors, in these manufacturing plants, and the union heads. And I mean, it was crazy what all I had to do to navigate to get our stuff installed in these factories. And I remember saying to myself more than once, I don't get how these companies can stay in business. The amount of discord and fighting, and I mean, it was palatable. And I get, that was kind of the automotive industry did kind of crash after, not long after that in a way. I mean, it was just crazy stuff that went on. And so anyway, I had that kind of lodged in there too. And then I'm going to make the story shorter here because I'm getting too wordy here. But then met a guy named Doc Childry, who's the founder of HeartMath. Long before HeartMath existed. Through some of our mutual friends back from the spirulina days, because he had become he started the first health food stores in the Carolinas, and we got into spirulina, and that's how we kind of met. And so I said, I'll go meet this character that I was being advised to meet. I'll go spend an hour. And I ended up spending about 3 days there with him. And he had been on his journey of he in hindsight, he calls it the school of hard knocks. He was kind of had a similar background, but had his own inner explorations and discovered the heart, and read a lot of the same books I had and practices, but took him to a much deeper level than I think certainly than I had. And that's, even though I knew about the heart, right, metaphorically, degree in consciousness studies, don't forget. So I knew this stuff, but no, I didn't, is what I learned. And so I kind of through those days with him and actually had my own, I'd say, a heart awakening, to where it became not just a concept or a metaphor. I really kind of had shifted up into some of my own higher dimensional perspectives, I guess. And
right.
So I basically had the courage to follow my own heart after that experience, because I'd been a meditator, in those kind of practices because of my background, but I can honestly say, Marcel, in the following 3 months, I made more personal progress and gains in all areas of my life than I had in many years of meditation practices and this kind of thing.
Wow.
I could have a great meditation in the morning, right? And I was, kind of, I won't say I was very good at it, but I was sincere about it, right? So have a good meditation in the morning for jumping in the car. And I was in Palm Springs at this time. And you probably know the area, the snowbirds and
Sure.
And by the time I got to work, I was already frustrated trying to navigate the traffic and this and that. And then I walk in and it's employee issues. So-and-so said so-and-so, and they're not getting along over here. And this vendor did that. And, so.
Drama, all the drama.
Yeah. So even though I was meditating, it wasn't carrying, I mean, it helped. I know it helped, but it wasn't really carrying over into life in a way that I really was able to then gain once I started learning how to get the heart and brain in sync.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So
anyway, sold that company and helped Doc found HeartMath along with some other people. And then I had to become a psychophysiologist. So that's what, so I've got the Ph.D. in psychophysiology and
yeah, just when you thought you've reached the stage of, okay, I've arrived. Okay, no, I'm going to pick up that PhD, right? Because
sorry for such a long-winded story, but
I like it because it fills in a lot of blanks that probably not too many people know about you, in a public setting like a podcast. I don't know how often you get to go back in your time machine, but it helps to kind of segue to where I want to go, because, by the way, can I backtrack to that degree in consciousness?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Can you explain what that is? Like, what did you learn? What's
Well, okay, so I learned a lot actually in that period. It's a master's degree that one of the first degree official degree granting institutions in consciousness. This is the 70s we're talking about now, right?
Yeah.
So late 70s. Well, I mean, that's where I was starting to learn what actually became very helpful in psychophysiology, really about the inner work, right? Being able to have a conversation with someone. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. I've actually put my finger on what did I learn, but it was a lot. Well, one of the things I learned, this is just kind of coming through here, and this may sound crazy, but it's actually, for me, in that time in my life, it was true. And through some of the practices and different things we did, I learned what ended up being a really important thing. And that was to actually really sit down and hear someone else, hear what their perspective is, what they're feeling. Didn't mean I had to agree with it. Now, I would say that can sound kind of silly in hindsight, but I suspect that's true for a lot of people in today's world. That to really sit down and open-heartedly hear somebody else's perspective doesn't mean you have to agree with or condone their perspective, right? Because I had an automatic defense mechanism. I ain't going to hear this because it's not what I believe or I feel or I agree with, right? So that was one of those important personal learnings in that era,
which we can certainly apply to these days, because what happens if we hear something we disagree with and we ingrain that into our belief system? What happens next? I think that's where we become biased towards someone else, or biased towards our own view and at the exclusion of other people. And so we marginalize them.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And from my perspective, that's one of the biggest issues we have in business, but in society at planetary level, is separation.
Mm-hmm.
It's that separation that we hold, and we have scientific terms for it: in group, out group, biases, these types of things. But it's really that a lack of civility. I mean, how it ends up manifesting, which I think we clearly see playing out in really all areas of life today. I mean, it's 20 years ago, a school shooting would have been, oh my God, what is happening, right? And now it's another school shooting. It's become so common. And I'm just using that as one symbol of so many other things that are like that, where we've really, as a society, I think, adapted to, this really lack of, well, not just civility, but dignity, kind of basic dignity. It's really dropping. And which really traces back to, well, two things from my perspective: a failure of self-regulation, right? Our inability to and we don't teach this, right? We don't teach it to our kids. We don't grow up. We have to stumble into and learn it. I think that would be another thing I started learning in that same area that you asked that question about, is how to self-regulate my inner world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. All right. So let's get back to the heart, because I really want to put the heart front and center. And, with all your research, people think the heart is just a pump, keeps us alive, keeps the blood flowing. And it's a very efficient pump. It still does that.
Yeah. Right.
We're not negating that,
Yeah.
but we're missing the whole story.
Yeah, definitely missing the whole story.
Okay. What have you found?
Well, okay. So I'm going to start. There's so many ways I could go with that question, but let me start with what's going to sound like some major new discovery, but it's not. And that is that the heart, when we talk about through the nervous system, right? The nerves that go from the brain, between brain and body.
Yeah.
The heart and brain are more interconnected through the autonomic nervous system than any other glands or organs in the body. And the heart sends far more information upstairs to the brain, and the brain sends down to the heart. Okay. So that's, a lot of people hear about it and they go, what? Well, that's been known since the late 1890s.
Oh.
1800s. This is basic anatomy. So a lot of people have heard of the vagus nerves in today's world. That's kind of getting out there.
Right.
And these are nerves that come down through the front of the body. They're the longest nerve in the body. And there are thousands of neural fibers in each one of the two vaguses. There's one that comes down each side. Okay, there's what's carrying information between the brain and all the glands and organs in the thoracic cavity, the lungs, the heart, and so on, right? 90% of those neural fibers are taking information from the body to the brain. It's only 10% that are brain down. Okay? And the majority of those are coming from the heart and cardiovascular system. Okay, so these are called afferent in the science language, but just ascending neural pathways. And the heart is really the only organ that we currently know of that actually has true what are called pacemaker cells that beat on its own. Okay, so it's setting the pace, the rhythm for the entire body. Now, okay, so what? We got all this neural information going to the brain. Well, in fact, the psychology, the field of psychology and behavioral psychology and all this was actually based on this knowledge until about the 1930s. This was well known, and then it kind of got forgotten, and a lot of rediscovery have had to happen. So in that paradigm from the 30s on, all became about the brain. And metaphorically, if you give the brain the oxygen and the blood flow and all that, the body was just there to carry the head around. That was really kind of how they looked at things back then. Yeah, nobody believes that anymore. It's just kind of silly to think that way, because we now know that the brain is largely interpreting the signals from the environment in the body to create our inner experience. Okay. So the paradigm really shifted in the 1970s when a particular research group, who ended up taking a lot of crap, to be honest, in their original findings from the scientific community, because it didn't fit that paradigm. They were finding that the heart in particular had its own, they actually used in language in their papers back then, like the heart acts like it has a mind of its own, right? Wow. Because you had these signals being sent down to the brain for the heart, say, to speed up in the sympathetic system, but it would slow down instead, or vice versa. And not only that, the signals the heart was sending to the brain was modulating perception, how we see the world. And not only that, somehow the heart had a way of knowing what was coming next to help prepare the brain to be in the right state to more accurately perceive the world. It's all in their original data. Yeah, well, anyway, this research group won all kinds of career awards and are legends now because they said that their hypothesis was eventually confirmed that the heart has a causal role in modulating perception. Okay, how we think, how we feel, right? So let me ask you a question. Why do I assume you're married, Marcel, right?
Yes.
Yeah. When you asked your wife, did you put your hand on your head and say, "I love you with all my brain"?
I probably thought of that, but no, I didn't.
Yeah, right. We probably not a good idea because what I'm saying is we somehow intuitively already know I love you with all my heart, right?
Right. And we even put our hand there. It goes
Exactly. So
right.
we have this sense that there's more to the heart. So what the science is starting to show is yes. Now, why is this important? Okay, so the next step in that chain of events that I was explaining, kind of the history of there, is that we introduced the idea of I'm going to say coherence or physiological coherence. Now, coherence is if you look it up in the dictionary, by the way, the first definition of coherence is usually describing the quality of someone's speech or writing. So hopefully I am putting my words together in a way that convey a coherent, wholeness meaning, right?
Mm.
And if I'd, had a little bit too much to drink last night and I showed up this morning and I'm uttering nonsense, you would say I'm right incoherent, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's very similar in physics and science. So
Okay.
coherence is a term we use, and it's actually a term and a concept that's from the very small, the molecular, all the way to the universe. We talk about coherence, and it's a scientific way of measuring things. And it has to do with how well the parts and the subparts of a complex system are working together harmoniously to create the wholeness. Okay, so if you think of the human, even a cell, but let alone a human body, a human system, the complexity that has to work together coherently for us to be healthy, let alone making good decisions and navigating life, right, in a way that then we can take that same idea of coherence to social. What are the relationships within a leadership team, within a family, within a company? Right, within a community, right, which has to do with how harmonious are those relationships. And if you think of the body, you've got very different glands, organs, systems doing very different things at very different rhythms and rates, but still all coherently working together to create the wholeness, health, and life. So, am I making sense here?
Yeah. Yeah. But let me stop you here because I want to make sure that I understand that conventional wisdom says that the brain is where intelligence comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's not completely crazy to say that the heart has intelligence and is influencing the brain. Is that too far off?
No, it's not crazy at all. Because that's the reason I wanted to introduce coherence. Is now we've now shown many research studies and later is now becoming well accepted in my field. Is that the heart? You could think of the heart. And I can explain this on different levels. So we work a lot with law enforcement, right? I can say we had the honor actually of developing the resilience program for the U.S. Navy, right? Based on these concepts. This is not some woo-woo thing. So you can think of the heart as the conductor of the orchestra of everything going on in the body.
Mm-hmm.
It's setting the rhythm and the pace that everything is synchronizing to create that coherence within the body, within our immune system, our hormonal system, our nervous system. So here's where it gets really interesting. Now, this took a bunch of labs, and I'm honored to say we were part of this story, but here in our lab. So we have all this neural information going up through the nerves to the brain. Now, we now know that it goes to every major brain center. Okay. Well, one of those is the very core of our brain called the thalamus. And for this to make sense, I need to add that for us to even be awake and conscious, but to perceive information accurately, to make good decisions, to have fast reactions and coordination, the neurons globally in the brain have to be in sync, literally synchronized, for information to flow through and be accurately perceived and all this. One of the roles of the thalamus is to synchronize globally the electrical activity, the neural activity within the brain. Right. So the information from the heart goes directly to the thalamus of one of many. It goes to all major centers. Now, here's where our early research came into play, and we kind of got known for it back in the early 90s, was showing that what we feel, whether we're frustrated or angry or impatient, or we're more calm or compassionate, appreciative, these emotions are directly reflected in the rhythmic patterns of the heart is beating. Right. So in today's world, we can tell with about 75% accuracy what somebody's feeling just by looking at the heart, what's called heart rhythm pattern. See, because that's going to the thalamus. And if it's in this, what we now call incoherent rhythm, it's kind of a jerky looking rhythm, like, like you're driving a car with one foot on the brake and the other foot on the accelerator at the same time. It's a jerky ride, right? All this. It's an incoherent rhythm. That basically inhibits the thalamus's role of synchronizing global electrical activity. When we feel good, and I don't mean good like happy necessarily, but happy could be part of it. But those other, I call them renewing emotions, but say love, which is a spectrum to me of appreciation and compassion and gratitude and kindness and these type of feelings. Yeah, we do this all the time. You walk out the door in the morning, and it's one of those days. Blue skies and the temperature's just right. And you're going, oh God, what a beautiful day, right? Well, you're actually feeling appreciation, even though you might not cognitively think that or even recognize that. That takes our heart rhythm into what we call a coherent rhythm. And that's the signal going up to the thalamus, increasing the neural synchronization. So we perform better. We think better, right? We have faster reaction.
So is it a choice? What's causing the incoherence for me to walk out the door and go, today's a crappy day. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and you have a crappy day.
Yeah. Well, it does. So, I'm just kind of giving you some really basic physiology here. I can kind of keep this discussion at that level, but we can go way more on what the heart's doing, right? So what we were then, once we understood the physiology and how important, and now here's one of the other neural circuits from the heart is going to a part of the brain called the amygdala or amygdalas.
Right.
That's where that's our emotional centers. So in fact, the neural activity in the amygdalas are literally synchronized to the heartbeat. So every time the heart beats, they fire in unison with it a couple milliseconds later, right? So whatever that heart rhythm pattern is going to the amygdalas. So why would you put our heart in our heart when we say, I love you with all my heart? So the amygdalas are interpreting the patterns from the heart it has a lot to do with our emotional experience.
Which then secretes, I'm guessing, all of the good hormones that we want flowing in our body, right?
Well, ultimately, through a chain. Yeah, absolutely. Through a chain of events and all that is true.
Okay.
So it's a system. That's the whole point. So we can, a lot of the incoherence gets started from the brain, right? Because through our histories and our patterns and our program, kind of unconscious programming that we build up from childhood over a lifetime.
Wow. In
group, out group, kind of perceptions, or we could do a whole show just on this process that I'm describing now. But now I'm taking another level of the heart.
Yeah.
Because that's basically, so what we then developed, once we understood the physiology, we were able to develop tools and techniques. This is why the Navy hired us, right, to develop their program. Why we work with so many law enforcement, first responders, hospitals.
Okay, but hold on. What were they looking for when they hired you?
Well, okay, so the Navy at that time. Well, that's another story. Then at that time, this is back during the Iraq wars and stuff. They had discovered that they had done a force-wide mental health assessment and discovered that a particular mission in the Navy had the highest risk, what they called stress injury, suicide, serious stuff, stress injury, right?
Right.
And so they went on a search to find something that could really help these men and women in this situation. I won't go into a lot of the details here, but so they did a year of searching and vetting, and they ended up going with hired us to develop and then train. I personally trained about 5,000 sailors, men and women, during that, about over a 5-year period. Very successful. But they actually have a great conceptual resilience program. I mean, it's really well thought out, but what they didn't have was the practical, how do I actually self-regulate when I've got this person in my face, that's either literally spitting in my face, this is detainee operations, or, yelling obscenities at my mother and these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right. Because, somebody spits in your face. What are you going to, the way I'm brought up, you're going to take them out. Right. I mean,
right.
You can't do that in this context. Right. That they were trying to evoke these kind of things. So how do you self-regulate in those kind of contexts? So they needed very practical skills that allowed people to maintain their composure in the middle of the chaos. I'll say it that way. I would usually say when the blank's hitting the fan, but I'll be a little right. So same thing for law enforcement, right? How do you maintain your composure? How do you, and we also do a lot of work with athletes. How do you maximize performance? So it's getting the systems in the body working together harmoniously in sync. But the heart's what's driving that. That's my point here. So then we were able to develop techniques that allow people to shift from incoherence to coherence right in the moment when you need it. Now we could go to the more of a social side of this if you want.
That might be a good way to explain for the people that are listening, maybe how it pertains to good leadership.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Boy,
can I quote you? Mark C. Crowley interviewed you, and I pulled a quote from one of his articles. Can I read it?
Of course.
All right. So this is you, and I quote, "When people feel appreciated by their bosses, supported, healthily connected to the people they work with, growing, loved, and able to live meaningful lives, this inherently creates coherence. All boiled down, it means the communication going on between the heart and mind is so ideal that it puts people in their optimal level of performance." End quote.
Sounds like me. Yeah. Great. So, I mean, there's so much work, in leadership now, and like you're a leadership coach, I know, and I know you're well aware of Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. Of course you are. I saw your interview with her actually. And, the work at Google, Project Aristotle, who found the same thing kind of independently. I assume you knew all about that. None of the things they thought that were performance in teams was the answer. It was basically that people feel safe to express their opinions and have time sharing. That's what Google found, which is the same thing as psychological safety, basically.
Yeah.
And this is sort of maybe a sidetrack, but I've, over the last few years, had conversations with some fairly high-level human resources folks at big companies here in the California area. And two of them actually said something very similar to me. One's a big construction company, that builds highways and stuff here in California. So we've changed our hiring practices. We now interview and want to make sure we can hire people who can get along with others. That's number one. He said, we can teach them how to run the equipment, or we can teach them certain skills, but we can't teach them how to be able to get along with the boss or to get along with others.
Yeah.
Interesting. And major companies are starting to shift to that kind of a perspective.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I was thinking of going in another direction, but
go wherever you want to go. Let's go.
Well, I brought Dr. James Doty. He was the last guest a couple weeks back.
Sure.
And he said the same thing. He referenced your research at the HeartMath Institute. The heart sends more information to the brain than the other way around, et cetera. We got to talk about the largest electromagnetic field in the human body is found within the heart.
Right.
So I got intrigued by that, by following your articles and your research about the electromagnetic field. Can we talk about that?
Sure.
What is it, and what's the link between the heart and that? What is it causing? And when we say electromagnetic field, what are we saying here?
Yeah, well, great. I love this topic, and this is kind of, if I look back on my life, Marcel, I can kind of see why I was a communication engineer, which was really preparing me for the work I do now in many ways, right? Because we're really good at you pick up a cell phone, right? How does the information, my voice, the text message, whatever, get from here to the cell tower and then, to wherever it's going? We're using electromagnetic fields to carry that.
Okay.
Right? This is the basics of any communication system, right? All right, so well, boy, I'm going to try to keep this really simple. All right, so when I pick up my, cell phones work indoors, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can even be in an elevator. Well, it's the magnetic part of the electromagnetic field that's going through things, goes through the walls, goes through the windows, all that, and carries the information along with it that you're modulating on that signal. Well, as it turns out, well, I've actually come to the perspective that all technology, nature invented first, right? And we're just learning how to use it. So when we put electrodes on the body to measure the electrocardiogram, right, the heartbeat, or you stick them on the head to measure brain waves, the electroencephalograph.
Right.
What we are literally measuring is electricity, the flow of electrical current. And that's the thing you see on the graph, and it comes out at is actual electrical energy.
Yeah.
Physics 101, whenever you have a flow of electrons, electric current, you generate a magnetic field, right? And that's the magnetic field, remember, that's going through things. So the electrodes, what they see is current flow produced by the heart beating. Now, so it's at the same time, you're creating a magnetic field that easily goes right through the skin because of that current flow out into the space around us. Now, you need a different instrument to measure that. It's called a magnetometer. So how do I know this isn't nonsense? Well, I can stick a probe out here and measure it, right? Right? Every time the heart beats, there's a field, right? It's radiated out external to the body. In fact, most larger hospitals have what are called MCG, magnetocardiogram, where you never touch the body. You can measure the heartbeat, and there's reasons that you would use that over the electrodes, but I won't go into that level of detail here. But so you can back up that magnetometer to about 3 feet and before you lose the ability to detect the heart's field, the magnetic field. You can do the same for the brain, but it's about an inch away before you lose the ability to detect it. So clearly, when we're talking energetically, if I can use that word, the heart's the big player here. So what we did, God, there's so many ways I could go here now. This is going back into some of our early research in the 90s, later 90s, I guess, that was measuring the magnetic field. We were able to, this were my Motorola days, right? Communication engineering came in handy because using almost exactly the same technique I used back in those days to look at the information being carried by the radio transmitter, right? To demodulate it, it's called, and see what is that voice or that text message, whatever, being carried. You can do the same thing to the magnetic field of the heart. And what we were able to show, this is all published for people interested in it, is that the heart is carrying emotional state information. And I suspect a lot more is information about our physiology, about our health, and is in that field, but for sure our emotional information. So what I'm saying, quite literally, we are broadcasting, we are radiating our emotions into the field. It doesn't stop at the skin. Right. Now, come on. We all know this. If you're, I mean, and by the way, I'm a skeptic. I'm not a cynic. There's a big difference I've learned. I didn't buy a lot of this stuff back in those early years. I had to really prove it myself in the lab. I mean, how many times have you heard someone say, God, the tension was so thick in the room?
You could feel it. Right.
You could feel it. You could cut it with a knife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
God, that was a good meeting. We were all, we cut through, made the decision. For business people, one of the first we hear this all the time now in the companies that bring in HeartMath tools and techniques into leadership or not just leadership, but in their companies. I think we first heard this, what was it, Hewlett-Packard? It was one of those that said that their meeting times have been cut in half. Right, the time it takes to have a meeting because they're listening deeper, they're more coherent together.
Right.
So you get the point I'm making here, and this is huge in business or in really anything. If you're a salesman, I mean, this list goes on. Because what I'm ultimately saying here, I'm not going to go through all the science, but it's there, is that there's an energetic communication system that's always going on under the radar for most people, between people when they're together or communicating. All right, so the next step in our research was to ask the question, okay, we know we're broadcasting. and the information's there. I can decode it and see that anger looks different than appreciation and so on, being carried by the field.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out our nervous systems, I believe it's our nervous systems as a whole, is also a big antenna that is receiving and demodulating, decoding the information in those fields for most people unconsciously, but it's still affecting how we perceive that person.
Okay, I'm no scientist, so forgive me if I sound like, like I don't know what I'm talking about. I probably don't, but I'm seeing an electromagnetic field as something that is invisible, and yet you're able to measure the waves, right?
Sure.
To see how far out it goes, right? Just like you said, our cell phone carries this field, and I don't know, it goes. I don't know how far it travels.
Miles, right? I mean,
Right. So are you able to measure the length of our electromagnetic field that our heart is projecting out?
well, to a certain degree, yes. As I said, with kind of modern magnetometers, you can measure it out to about 3 feet. Now, that doesn't mean the field stops at 3 feet. That's the sensitivity of the equipment.
Okay.
A bunch of years ago, it was maybe only a foot, right? So as we get better instrumentation, we can measure it better. I actually have one of these books on my bookshelf. It kind of amazes me, that it has an image that was produced in 1886, where scientists measured the magnetic field from the heart external to the body, and actually had the shape of the field right, all the way back into the 1886. So,
Well, the reason I ask is because, you know how you referenced how when you walk into a room, and it's the tension is so thick you can cut it with a knife, right? Well, I've actually sat down in rooms just a few feet away from somebody, and you can be as skeptical as you want here, okay? But this is me knowing in my heart of hearts what I was experiencing in the moment is somebody that the energy was so negative,
right,
that I could literally, it was like, it was palpable, right? I sat down and just by the body language and whatever that person was projecting, the way they were communicating, the tone of voice, everything told me that something is off here. And there's something going on here because the atmosphere around this person, just a few feet from me, was really just, I don't even know. I mean, the word negative, maybe pessimistic, toxic, right?
How about incoherent?
Incoherent, right? In the scientific way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can, as you think about this, I'm sure you're starting to see the relevance in business or in leadership, or in psychological safety, in creating a harmonious team. There's now that I've gotten to understand this, and it took some learning for me. I mean, my original hypotheses were wrong, and I had to adjust, and a lot of this stuff. But I've how many times now since this work, I've just sort of been observing a conversation go on between two people, and you kind of overhearing them, and somebody will say something to another person, in the words, and you're absolutely right. We communicate a lot through body language and tone of voice. I'm not taking away from that. I'm just saying there's an additional communication system going on.
Right.
Where a person tells someone something, but you can kind of tell, it's like you were saying, there's something else going on. Either there's some frustration in there, or anxiety, or maybe fear. Yeah. And that's what their field is broadcasting.
But it affected my field because then
that's exactly
threw me off. I was off my track then.
Yeah, exactly. So I've actually watched, though, where people who then respond back to the person are communicating back words and tones that reflect the information in the field, and they completely missed what they actually said through the words. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen the same thing happen if you think back about it. But now that I'm aware of these dynamics, it's amazing how often that goes on between people. So this ends up being one of the major root causes of miscommunication. And miscommunication is one of the things that many studies have shown is a huge factor that costs business, like billions every year. And then in hospital, and it's one of the major problems in miscommunication in hospitals. It leads to all kinds of things we don't want to see happen. I mean, it's actually kind of scary what happens in healthcare industry due to miscommunication.
Right. Right. So there's incoherence.
Incoherence, right?
Between staff or between doctors and patients.
Right. Or within leadership teams, misunderstanding.
Right. Okay. Is that what you're talking about? I read one of your white papers. Is that what you refer to as biomagnetic communication between people?
That's more of a scientific way of saying it. That's the title, I think, of a chapter in a book on bioelectromagnetic medicine. But I just call it energetic communication for keep it simple in our training programs.
Right. So is that what was going on with me with that person? That
absolutely. Again, it's not taking away from tone of voice, body language. Those are all real,
but there's something chemically going on.
But when we've demonstrated this in the lab, people way more than 3 feet apart. I mean, like 5-6 feet apart with barriers in between them, and you can actually see physiological measure. You can actually measure how our physiology will respond to the information in another person's field. So there's absolutely no question that this is going on. It then becomes a question of our ability to self-regulate to get here's another part of what the research is showing. If we're able to be more coherent in our own body and our own physiology, that creates I'm an old guy. We used to have to turn knobs on radios, to tune in the station, right? But we have an inner knob like that. So when we're coherent, we can become more aware of the information in the field, and at the same time, less affected or knocked off our center by it. So as a good leader, becoming more energetically aware of what the dynamics, the emotional dynamics that are going on, within a team or within a group is kind of really important.
Okay, so I'm going to make.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say I'm going to make a leap to say that maybe you have to be more intuitive or rely on your intuition.
Yeah, well, we've done a lot of research on intuition as well. Okay. That's a whole topic. Okay. And there are 3 types of intuitions, what our research and many others combined suggest. One is called implicit knowledge or implicit learning. And that's where we've learned things and forgot we learned them or didn't know we learned them, but it's all about the brain and pattern matching and all that. And it's an important thing. Expert knowledge is kind of in that category. And then I call the second type energetic sensitivity. This is what we're talking about now. This is our nervous system's ability to receive and accurately decode the information from external sources, external fields. I put empathy in this category. To actually really feel the information from another person. Another example, we now know that, there really are people who can sense earthquakes before they occur. It's probably more relevant here in California than where you are. But we now know we can measure changes in the Earth's magnetic field environment that precede earthquakes. So our nervous system is able to feel that, decode it, and that we've had enough experiences to know that that's what that signal means, right? And then non-local intuition is the third category.
Okay. All right. So let me go back to coherence. So if we want to take this idea of coherence further in our own lives, in our own communities, in our own businesses, how do we amplify it so that we're literally shifting the atmosphere towards coherence? How do we do that?
Well, I'm going to be shameless and do a plug for us because we have a number of training programs that do exactly that. The one's called Coherence Advantage. This is really more for company. It's a program for organizations. It's very similar to the program we developed for the Navy, for example. But it's something that can be brought in employee-wide in companies to start giving them the basic understandings of in a simple way that people can get and understand a lot of what we've been talking about today. But with a focus on the actual how-to. How do you actually shift into coherence, in the moment that you need to, right? So it's not about meditation and that kind of stuff. It's about very practical, in the moment self-regulation and getting coherent before making decisions or during meetings, this kind of thing. And that's right. We have about 10,000 trainers globally in that program now. And then another one's called, there's 2 names: Activating the Heart of Teams or team and organizational coherence is kind of the second name it's often used. And that's really more for intact teams or groups. It could be a nursing team, right? Or it could be a leadership team, but it's really bringing in the skills and both the knowledge, but also the practical skills of how do we start creating more coherence, clearing past histories and these types of things amongst team members, those types. So two very practical programs. And, it's really easy to teach these techniques. The key, though, is sustainability. And that's actually what we learned over the years with the Navy is, you can learn a HeartMath technique, a coherence technique, how to shift into coherence in a couple of minutes, and then practice it. But how do you bring that in and sustain it within an organization? How do we create not always a culture change? A lot of times the culture is fine, but it's the climate that's got the problem.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense after having this conversation. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. If you've got there's so much, it's really interesting that so much data, and I don't know if this is still true, but a few years ago, the workers' comp claims in the state of California, the number one, this surprised me, even me, correlation to workers' comp claims for back pain was the relationship with your direct supervisor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's just like you can be having a party or a great conversation somewhere and everything's coherent and you're having a great time and somebody walks in who's upset, right? They want you to feel it too, right? You know what I'm talking about? It totally disrupts the harmony of what was going on. Same thing goes on in business. I hope I'm making some sense here.
Yeah, but let's get back to the practical though, because you got my curiosity, and I'm sure my audience is going, well, we need to know how to bring ourselves into a state of coherence. You said you could do it in less than 2 minutes. Yeah. What are some skills that we can apply?
Okay, well, I'll give you one. This is from our Activating the Heart of Teams program.
Yeah,
it's called shift and lift. It's a technique, 3-step technique.
Okay.
First step is called heart focused breathing. Okay, so for heart broken, we can do it right now if you want.
Okay, let's do it.
You focus your attention in the area of the heart. Okay, right in the center of your chest. I don't mean go into the heart, but right here in the center of your chest. Now imagine your breath is flowing in and out of your heart or chest area. Breathing a little slower and deeper than usual, but find a rhythm that's easy and comfortable. A little deeper and slower. But that focus in the heart area is actually important if we're trying to draw the energy down into the heart area. And when you're first learning it, you can maybe try and breathe in for about 4 or 5 seconds and breathe out for 4 or 5 seconds. Don't hold your breath between, just an easy rhythm. But I don't want you to be counting very long, if you're counting, just to get the idea of the rhythm. Now, as you maintain the heart focused breathing, I want you to activate feelings of kindness, appreciation, genuine connection, or an attitude of deep listening. Now, radiate these heart qualities to raise your vibration and help lift the energy field environment that surrounds you. So this is a technique that, it takes some practice and context, but just to give you an idea, this is something that's called shift and lift. We teach this. It's something you can do with your eyes open. Nobody needs to know you're doing it. Right when you're in a meeting or dealing with a difficult person or a client that might be going sideways or not, just to create a more coherent environment. So it's where we're taking responsibility for the information we're putting into that energetic field environment and how that is affecting the other people or person in the environment.
Yeah, I tried to get right into it, and I think what happened was I got into such a state of relaxation because I had to remove myself from, okay, I'm a podcast host interviewing somebody, right? I had to really get into it. And when you talked about the imagery, the guided imagery of kindness, like towards someone else, I immediately thought of my son, and he's 11, and how the world that he's growing up in, and how much stress he may be taking on that I don't know about, and that he's not able to articulate at an 11-year-old level for me to understand. And so he may be internalizing it. And so the kindness aspect was me imagining or visualizing laying down on the carpet and saying, "Come here, let's just talk."
Mhm.
And then just listening to him and just trying to understand his little world. And because there are things that I know he is confused about, the things he hears and watches, etc. So and right at that moment, my body almost it relaxed to such a degree that I had to actually hold on to my standing desk because I was so relaxed. I started to hunch down. So that's what happened to me.
Yeah. So now, of course, that was if we're really teaching that, we go through it a lot slower and give the context for each of the steps and the math as to why. But
yeah, but that breathing really helped. The breathing is similar to meditation breathing, to mindfulness breathing. I think, but without I didn't hold, like you said, don't hold your breath at the top or at the bottom of the cycle. So I didn't do that.
The heart focus is
right
important here.
So if you're having a hard time focusing on the breath coming out of your heart, because you can't visualize that, right? What's a good technique to make your breathing focusing on the center of your chest?
Yeah, like we said, imagine your breath is flowing. I mean, I know we're breathing through our nose, but so imagine you're good. Now, about half the people with a little practice actually do start experiencing an energetic. You actually can start feeling an energetic flow through the heart area. You actually feel it, an energy. Yeah. I'm involved in some experiments right now with some collaborators in measuring it's called photonic energy that comes from the heart when we do these kind of techniques. And when we feel, when radiating love, for example, that there really actually is a measurable increase in photon emission from the heart area.
Right, right. So that addresses my question, I think, Rollin, that is, if you're doing that and you're activating that coherence in you, and you have a room of people or a whole department, a team, or a whole company that is consistently doing that over time, you're going to have a coherent organization. And yeah, never mind the culture thing. Culture's great, but you said something that really struck me. It's the climate. So yeah, the culture might be a healthy culture, right? You share the values, but it's the climate, the actual electromagnetic field, the climate that may
the day-to-day climate. You feel like you're excited to go to work, or you dread work, right?
Yeah, you may be in a great culture and still feel dreadful.
Yeah.
Because you're incoherent, or because the people around you are sending off bad vibes, if I may say that in a metaphorical sense. But I think there's validity in saying that the bad vibes now, we can fill in the blanks to say it's somebody being out of coherence.
Yeah. I if I may, I look at companies, almost any size company, except for maybe a very small one, as an organism. So if you think of the body as an organism, and you've got to stub your toe or something, right? Well, that's not a great analogy, but if you got something going on in one part of the body, it really takes energy away. You're not in that kind of wholeness, that flow of a really healthy, functioning, coherent individual. Same thing in organizations. You can have a lot of good stuff going on, everything working in one department or one group that's really out of sync. That can really, it's like a disease or a health problem within the organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to bring it back into synchronization and alignment with the wholeness.
Well, Rollin, what's going on in the world with our political environment, and how this is, I feel we're in the most divided era, at least in my lifetime. And, I wasn't around, during the world wars, but I can imagine it was pretty bad then too. But if you're, looking to change our country situation, starting with you, the listener, whether you're Republican, Democrat, on the left or on the right, how do we get out of this mindset? You're my enemy if you don't believe the same, or if you're red and I'm blue. What's the path forward?
My real answer to that, I think there's only one way. And that is, as enough of us as individuals in the greater organism of humanity kind of wake up, and the heart, intelligence of the heart, that kindness, that deep, genuine listening, these kinds of qualities are the only thing that's going to be able to lift us above the mind's biases and the separations that we do. As I said earlier, a big learning for me back in the 70s when I was going through my consciousness degree education was really getting that I can truly, genuinely hear what somebody else has to say, what their perspective, their beliefs are. Because we don't know their background, their upbringing, their situation. Doesn't mean we have to agree with them or condone them. But I found that once somebody that I totally disagree with, if we actually can get to that state of actually really hearing each other, oftentimes we're not as far apart as we might think or believe. I don't know if that is, but I think that's what we have to do. We have to bring more love. I was invited, kind of an honor to speak at a conference in India in March of this year. And this was a conference bringing the world's spiritual traditions together. First time this has happened since, I think it was 1893 in Chicago, where the major religious leaders from all around the world were brought together. And so it was pretty cool to be invited to this thing. And in the conference in 1893, one of the famous people there, what came out of it was that we need tolerance amongst the world's religions and spiritual traditions. But one of the speakers who I really admired at this one basically said, no, it's not tolerance that we need. It's acceptance. And it was so right on. And in the talk I gave there, how I ended mine is I said that it's time for love to go viral. And so I think that's the real answer. It is time for love to go viral, because it is love that's going to raise us above, the mind's biases and the separations and things and where we realize we really truly are all interconnected at a very deep fundamental level. And for humanity to thrive, we've got to get the separations or what's stopping our being able to really thrive. Let me add just one more thing here, if I may. I know we're running on time. So I used to say, I had read somewhere that with 10% of the world's military budget, what we spend on defense and wars and stuff, that every man, woman, child on planet Earth, everyone could be fed, have clean water, housed, and educated. Right. So I couldn't find the reference for it. And I think I might have a book here. Oh, here it is. I was visited a couple of years ago, Dr. Celia Ellsworthy. If you haven't interviewed her, she would be awesome. She wrote the book, The Business Plan for Peace. So she was here and she'd give me her book and stuff. And I asked her about that because that was what her book's about. She goes, no, that's my work. But you're wrong. It's far less than 10%. So imagine that if we could learn to get along, right? Yeah. Every person on earth could be, and that's where a lot of the problems we have stem from, is that lack of care, right? It's not an issue of technology. This is where it's really a problem in our own individual consciousness, us waking up to who we really are as multidimensional beings that are really here on earth, from my perspective, to learn how to love.
Yeah, that's a great segue to one of my last questions as we bring it home here, Rollin. It's the love question. So we ask every guest this question: how do we lead with more practical, actionable love as leaders every day?
Great question. I mean, love is a great concept, and we can talk about love in many ways and what it does physiologically and energetically and so on. But I think what I think, ultimately love has to reach down into the real world, sky meeting street. And so love has to become what I think of as care in action. We have to care. If I may say, we have to give a shit.
Yeah.
We have to care about people. We have to care about our planet, all these types of things. So it's that care is really the energy of love that brings it into the real world, into our companies, into our communities, into our families, so on. And part of that, I think an important step of that is our own self-awareness and self-honesty, of becoming aware of what, especially us men, we tend to, water emotions and, that under the radar stuff, but be really honest that we really are emotional beings, and it's emotions that run the show, and starting to become more responsible for what we're feeding the field, our energetic field. And we didn't get into this today, we didn't have time, but how what we feed our local field is also interacting with and affecting a large global field, and how we're all contributing to that. So it's enough of us as individuals start taking that responsibility and adding more love, care, compassion, kindness into the field, that it makes it easier for others around us and even globally to wake up to their next level, their next step.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. All right. Well, you close us out. That one thing, what can we take home with this? I think that's what I was just referring to, is what I would invite you to do, everyone listening, is to pause throughout the day as often as you can think of doing it. It could be in between moments. You're walking from one place to another or whatever, or between calls. Just pause and go inside and ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? What are the feelings I'm radiating? What's the energy I'm radiating? Is it feelings of frustration because my to-do list is not getting done, or impatience, or maybe fear for some people in today's world? Or if so, do heart-focused breathing, that simple technique, and then choose to radiate more compassion, more gratitude, more appreciation into the field. That's great.
It matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's this conversation exceeded my expectations of where we were going to end up. I mean, we covered a lot, and I know that it wasn't enough time. I would love to bring you back, if I may, just to continue the discussion. I mean, just like you said, the topic of intuition alone could be a podcast in itself. So if you're open to that, I'd love to bring you back. I'm open to it. Yeah. Very good. All right. So if people want to connect with you, learn more about you, where can they go?
Well, heartmath.org is our website. .org, right? Sometimes we miss that part. Heartmath.org, and a lot of free resources there. Information about what we do. Research library that has hundreds of papers you can download for free if you're into the science side. One of my books called Science of the Heart, pretty popular for the science-minded. The book I'm a co-author of, called Heart Intelligence, is a great way to get started. And if you want to reach out to me more personally, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there.
Fantastic. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed our conversation today.
Oh, yeah. It's been a blast. Keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast. And look for my show notes. I'll make sure to include all of Rollin's contact info and the book reference, as well as everything else that we talked about. My goodness. So you can find all of that on my website, marcelschwantes.com. And finally, if you're interested in sponsoring an episode of the show, hey, let's chat. Reach me on my website or hit me up on LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.